James.
Hello, everyone. Welcome on in.
Hey. Well, we are very excited to talk about Uranus entering Gemini, which already happened yesterday, but
Yeah.
it's a long transit, so we're still considering ourselves on time.
Yes.
Ricky, before I'm just gonna sometimes we forget to give the actual date, so I'm just like right out the gate gonna say that. So this week, Monday, July 7th, 2025, Uranus entered Gemini at 12:47 a.m. Pacific time. It will dip back into Taurus on November 7th, and then back to Gemini again, April 25th, 2026, until August 3rd, 2032. And there'll be a little dancing back and forth the end of 2032 to 2033. But we're really embarking on this sort of new, I would say, 7-year journey with Uranus. So, Ricky, I know you're
Yeah.
always electrified with your Uranus placement in your chart. So, what's your first feeling here?
You know what I love is that before you and I recorded this today,
Mm,
we both had some electrifying experiences happening at the same time.
true.
So I felt like it was an initiation from Uranus to be like, okay, we're going to do this. Let's do it. So I felt like we had permission to do something like this today. So I do love Uranus. I was blessed in the sense where I do have a very prominent Uranus in my personal life. And so this has been a planet that I've studied, archetypally for a while because I feel like it has always fascinated me. And so one of the things that I just figured maybe to kind of lean into this, I wrote a quote here in my notes to kind of get into Uranus Gemini energy. And then we could kind of break it down, I guess, into, Uranus itself. I wrote to liberate the soul from the conditioned perceptions and our communication. With Uranus, I always say this that there's something very excitingly destabilizing. There's this excitement that unfolds, and there's something that can be very destabilizing about Uranus. And I mention this because the more that you learn about Uranus being, right after Saturn, it's almost like this really um, unexpected and deconditioning energy that wants to just break things open. I get excited because, I'm so passionate about our journeys individually at a soul level for evolution that Uranus is helping us crack open to dive deeper into exploring what that looks like. And so I feel like Uranus entering Gemini feels like in Gemini, this is the area that we are experiencing some areas of our consciousness that need to be cracked open, that need to be deconditioned, that need to be deconstructed. And so I get excited because I feel like in these moments is a massive opportunity for us to evolve, whether at an individual level or a society. So I'm excited for this. But that's just kind of my initial thought I wrote down to kind of get us talking into Uranian energy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's prominent in my chart too. I have Sun Uranus square, so I sometimes feel like I'm a Cancer, but with a whole dose of something very different in there. And it's interesting in kind of my notes for preparation and when I was kind of feeling into what's coming up or what we're coming into, there's a word called revelator, right? There's a song called Revelator. Sometimes Revelator is very linked with more religious aspects, but it doesn't have to be, right? Revelator meaning someone that reveals, the truth or something is revealed through. And so I see the planet Uranus as a revelator. And in Gemini, I see it particularly revealing the information or the knowledge or the communication, almost like the little bits and pieces suddenly are revealed for what they are.
Yeah.
And I think with Gemini having so much to do with stories, right? The story we make up about our lives, the story we make up about what's happening right now, the story I make up about my partner when he does X, Y, Z, right? Where our whole lives are these stories. And so I think we're coming into a period where what we thought internally and externally, we're going to have some very abrupt disruptive breakthroughs or potential for breakthrough in what those stories are. So in some ways, I see this as, you're going along and chapter one and chapter two, and it's like all of a sudden, the sidewalk ends and you drop off or something. It has that sort of feeling to me of where the path we won't be able to continue it the way we have been. And like you, I find it exciting. Of course, there's some scary in there too, but I find it exciting because I find myself at a point in my life where I don't want to follow a story that's an old conditioning that doesn't align with my more authentic nature. And so I totally agree with the excitement, but I just want to give like kind of big disclaimer here that Uranus, we can't predict it. We sometimes joke as astrologers that if you predicted it, it wasn't Uranus, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. So we're in for, I think, some very interesting times. And one of my little notes was I put that um, we will likely experience more quote unquote crazy. We will experience more crazy in our own heads, in our communication, in the news, in our exchanges, the way we see things and relate to things, the way we interpret things.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that as we get into this talk a little bit more, I think digging into this word crazy is going to be helpful for all of us because I think we may start to see how quote unquote crazy we really are. And I think that's a
Yeah.
good thing because I think there's an honesty into actually not living sort of, how do we say it? Like you just mentioned Saturn coming before Uranus, right? So Saturn tends to keep things suppressed, right? So it's like, okay, all this stuff underneath here, and I'm just trotting along here.
Yeah.
I think this is where, again, you know, this bridge or this thoroughfare or whatever you might want to call this thing that we move through, it's like it's going to blow up. Some-
Yeah, there has to. And I think it's almost like a tower, right? It's like it has to
Yeah.
come down. Um, and so I love the other thing that I love about Gemini in this way is when we think about Gemini, often a lot of people associate Gemini with like communication
Yeah.
and maybe it's tied to the siblings or whatnot. One of the things that I think is interesting is that Gemini has a lot to do as well with how we process and gather information.
Yes.
And so what happens is that from an energy perspective, the way in which we're gathering and processing the information, like I'm going to go out here and see everything that's going on out here, all of that's going into my brain. Well, here's the deal. Uranus could shock that energy of how we are gathering and receiving and what we're processing, which will, as a result, affect how we're digesting that information, how we are going to view our reality that we're experiencing. This gives me the energy of like those quantum shifts, those paradigm shifts, those perspective shifts. Like there's that quote from Dr. Wayne Dyer, when you change your perspective, you change your life.
Yeah.
That feels very Uranus and Gemini for me about completely altering your perspective on something and it will completely change your life forever. And you can't plan for this. You can't like sit down and be like, okay, this is how it doesn't work that way. And coming from someone who does have a very strong Uranus in their chart, I've learned to look at life as literally every day, every moment of your day is different. And you can't possibly plan. You can have an ideal, a vision, but like there are going to be things that happen that are out of your control. And you have to learn to welcome those I look at them as invitations and
Yeah.
opportunities. And what Uranus's invitation is to crack open the old thought patterns, the old mental frameworks that are going on up here that are not, they can't come with you anymore. They
Yeah.
need to be reworked. The neural nets and all of those things that go
Yes.
on in the brain need to be shifted and moved, and new ones need to be born. And so it's gonna be a shift, like you said, you can't plan for. And like I said earlier, is it gonna be destabilizing? Yes. Is it gonna be disruptive? Yes. Is it gonna be exciting? Yes. It's
Yeah.
it's all of these are happening at once. Um, and I mention this because, like you said, Uranus isn't rainbows, buttercups, and butterflies, but
No.
it'll get you somewhere. It'll totally shift you in that direction. So if you've been feeling monotony or boredom, or if you've been feeling stagnancy, those words do not get along with Uranus.
No.
Um, and this can be sort of that shift, that wake up, that sort of moment of um, I don't know. I also am feeling like light bulbs going off. Like I could totally see
Mm,
like the light bulbs going off for people, those recognitions. Like this is a huge moment for clairsentient beings through the
yeah,
roof. If you are a clairsentient being, which is like where you feel like you're receiving downloads of wisdom,
yeah.
oh my God, this is going to be an amazing time if you're in the receiving space for those downloads, if you are grounded enough for those downloads, if you are in that open vibrational space to receive it.
Well, that's such a good point because you and I have chatted about this many times, but that change happens through the body. It doesn't happen through insight, through the mental realm. So, I mean, don't get me wrong. I love me some mental, spiritual realms. Like I could be in those space all the time, but that's outside of this space we live
Mhm.
in. And so with Uranus and Gemini, with, that being Gemini being an air sign and the mutability and the sort of being all over the place, to your point, if there's not an anchor, if there's not something sort of grounding the energy, not only can it not be used for something, it
Yeah,
also can literally fry our circuits. You know what I mean? So
totally.
so I think there's something in here around how do we, and we can also say that Gemini has a lot to do with the nervous system,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah,
because you mentioned connections and how we sort of connect information and things, but also in the body, all the different connectors.
totally.
So I'm just going to say, wherever there's Uranus, oftentimes there's disruption in the connection or connections. So even how your own, I'm not a medical person, right? But even how your own neurotransmitters, right, are sending messages, you might find all of a sudden that your body feels different. You may find that something isn't connecting the way it used to, or something might snap into place, right?
Yep,
It makes me
totally.
just sort of think of these little like I don't know, those little synapses firing or whatever it
Yep,
is. I don't know the right words to use around it, but you get what I mean. And so whatever level that is though, um, we could have an insight about something, but if there's not a somatic experience, and I know I sound like a big preacher around this, but this is why astrology, I feel like astrology is such a good tool. It gives us language, it helps us get into all our different parts represented by planets, but it does not replace having some
mhm,
ritual active imagination, some physical embodied experience of things. If we just use astrology to what do you want to call it, like stimulate our minds and to get us, all excited in that way, we actually can create a further divide.
totally.
And I think this particular transit might hyper emphasize where we have that divide. And so you might feel yourself like, whoa, I can't even, I'm not normally this jittery, right? Or
Yeah,
I don't normally have this strange, what is this like weird twitch? I'm saying those things are more likely to happen now.
totally. I
Anxiety too, like,
Oh, through the
mhm.
roof, worrying through the roof,
Yeah.
and that also is accented by Jupiter and Cancer. Um,
Yeah. Who that
so what
likes to be safety, safety. Where's our safety, right? Yeah.
100%. The other thing that you were just saying, and I always say this to people, like when we look at our charts, and I can say, oh, you have the sun in Cancer, blah 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 blah. Oh, it's always like all of that information is great, but what are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to embody the information that you are being provided? Like, we could sit here and talk about it all day,
Yeah.
but talking is not action. And there's something about action which causes us to come back into our bodies to do something
Yeah.
with what we know is happening. So it's almost like I look at it sometimes as there's a wave that's coming in, and it's a 7 year long wave. It's going to take a while to reach the shore. Are you going to ride that wave the entire time and be in the action of that wave, doing what the wave is asking of you? Or are you just going to sit in the ocean? And it's almost like when you ride the wave and you're doing what the wave is asking us, the ritual of allowing us to be guided, and whether that's through meditation or whether that's through doing yoga, whether that's through coming back into the heart center, whatever it may be, you can safely and gently go with the flow of where the energy is going. It's like you're utilizing the tool. Like the tool is giving you sort of a map or a GPS, however you want to look at it. But the soul has to do something with it. Otherwise, it's just wasted information.
And you have shared this on different times too. Not only is it wasted information, it's now over, it's like
Oh yeah,
it's actually making it, it's not, you know what I'm saying? Like so
over.
yeah, so you have so much that now you're just more, nothing's digestible. Would you say then, Ricky, that one of the things maybe that we could all do, and I always want to say that like these types of talks, like the collective energy is important, but your own birth chart, so if seeing your own astrologer or doing whatever it is that you do, like that's the way it really gets personal. And looking at the house that Uranus is in, where Gemini is in your chart,
Yeah.
can be very helpful personally. But collectively, for all of us, one of the things I'm thinking about as you were just talking is, where am I getting my information? What do I
Oh
listen to? What do I read? Who am I talking with?
yeah.
Many of you have heard me say how I'm not in love with social media. Like on a regular, every daily basis, part of me just wants to completely close down my accounts. Well, those feelings are coming even stronger to me now. So I think for all of us to put into practice what you're saying, Ricky, is might ask, where am I getting my information? What information am I sharing? Is it, and to your point, how is it helping me?
Yeah.
How is it helping people around me? How is it making life better? How is it making the
Yeah.
planet better? And then maybe even another question might be, or is it hurting those things?
Totally.
Because some of the things that we take in, some of the things that we share, some of the ways that we interpret, some of the ways, these are some Gemini sort of shadowy things, the way we categorize, the way we
Yeah.
pigeonhole, the way we put all of this and, give it this name or call it that or whatever it may be, like that can be very, very harmful. And so I see this
Totally.
Uranus in part of saying, where do we need to liberate ourselves from being stuck in streams of information? And I'm going to say, typically I say beliefs is more Jupiter, but or Sagittarius, but it's also the polarity with Mercury and Gemini, because what we think and how we make sense of things forms our daily beliefs.
Yeah. I was just about to bring this up with Sagittarius because the cure to all of this,
Mm.
whether it's astrology or whatever it may be, why are you getting that information? Like, what is the purpose of it all? Like, why are you doing this? Like, why are you listening to this astrology video? Why are you wanting to read this book? And being able to identify the why
Yeah.
can help crack the need for more, or whatever it may be, because it gives you an intention. And I think what I'm feeling into is, what is your intention for why you're doing what you're doing? Whether it's through, what are you like, why am I learning this information? Like,
Yeah.
why am I wanting to buy this new book? Why am I taking this new class? Am I just doing this because I don't feel like I know enough yet? Like, are you falling into that syndrome that I can never become an astrologer because I don't think I'm going to know enough information? Or
Oh,
am I,
where's our head?
and
Yeah.
so it's like that type of
Yeah.
mentality. And then you ask yourself, like, when do you leave the data behind and step in and say, I can do this?
Ooh.
I've learned, and now it's time for me to share. And that's the Gemini and Sagittarius axis for me. And I feel like the overwhelming overstimulation of Gemini, um, I just had a thought, an intuitive thought just came to me as you and I are doing this. I'll bring it up in
Good.
just a second.
Love it.
um, as we are doing the the Gemini Sagittarius and gathering all of this information, I would just ask myself again, why am I doing this, and what is my purpose? What is my intention? And I feel like that puts you in the receiving space even more to step into who you're meant to become, or what you're meant to do with whatever it is that you want to learn.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing I just want to say before it slips my mindset is the possibility and the potential of awakening dormant information inside of you
Ooh.
that's already there.
Ooh. Yeah, you don't have to go out and get it. You just have to, and maybe this speaks to like the slowing down and tuning in, which is difficult with Gemini energy.
Totally.
But as you're saying it, I get this, that, so that makes me excited because I want that to
Yes.
happen.
Exactly. That's what I was saying. I got really, that's why I had to say it. Because if I don't, and there's this potential of latent information. I mean, I always say this. I'm sure you agree with this. I think sometimes there's so many complexities to tarot and astrology
Yeah,
that at a deeper layer, the soul must have had some level of familiarity with
agree.
certain
Yeah,
wisdoms or knowledge or systems to be able to come into this lifetime and be able to grasp the information and be able to adapt it and apply it and use it. I feel like it's not new. It was
Yeah.
latent in the body. It was latent because it's inside of you. It literally is. And there is something to this that you were saying earlier that I think is so important, that we recognize that this is an electric field of opportunity, but all of that energy begins from the electric field within you. And that is where the information resides. You don't have to look far to receive it, to get it, to download it, to have it. It's just allowing yourself to lean inward and recognize where that information is. There's a beautiful, I think it was Eckhart Tolle who said, I'm not a teacher. That's not who I am. And I always say this now, I'm not here to teach you. I feel like what I do is I'm sharing information that you already know, you just forgot.
I agree.
And this is
Yep.
all about remembering.
And
And
with
there's something about Uranus that has to do with the memories that we can't remember because they are from past life experiences or whatnot. And
yeah,
it's ironic that we're in Gemini, which is very linear. That's
yes.
where this comes from, just to connect the dots for people, is that there can be this sort of information that you've already know that you don't know right now because Uranus is unexpected, that you start recognizing like, oh, I already know this. Like, how do I
Yep.
know? Why is this so easy for me to learn?
And maybe, because I totally agree with you, Uranus has, to me, I mean, we always say, right? Jeffrey Wolf Green says, "Big brain in the sky," right? So it's a
Yeah,
collective brain. So, and it is intelligence that we are all. This is the thing, we're not separate from it. It the same way that we say Neptune is everything spiritually or emotionally, right? Uranus is the everything is part of this collective intelligence, and so with
amen.
Gemini, the wiring somehow oftentimes can run smoother, like or we can like catch the frequency. So that just like when you were talking about how like it electrifies in your body, the thing is that again, that energy needs a place to land or a place to run through. It makes me
Totally.
think with that Gemini, also sometimes when you remember or all of a sudden the thing, just pops in and you're like, wow, whether or not you're remembering it from a personal thing or whether or not you're just tapped into a collective intelligence that you're part of, I say, who cares? All ends
Exactly.
up the same place. But Gemini can help you actually find a way to share and translate that.
Bingo.
One of the things I really, really resonated with what you said about the teaching because I struggle oftentimes with calling myself a teacher. I know that I teach, but I really also feel like I'm sharing.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that I do in my process is I find different creative ways to give words or language or images to things. That's different than me like bestowing some knowledge upon you. It's like working with language in a way so that our own wiring pops open, or our own sort of receptor. All of a sudden, like the antenna's like, oh, I can know how to receive that word or that picture or that art. And so that feels very Uranus and Gemini to me. And so I really, the clairsentience, all the clairs,
Yeah.
claircognizance, I would
Huge.
say, yeah.
Huge chapter for this. And I feel like the other the other thing that I would say is it may require a how do I want to say this? This may require us to be more open-minded
Mhm.
and opening up our thoughts, what we do believe, and our perceptions. And I say this because Gemini can be very curious. One quote that I've been using, I don't know where it comes from, but a quote that I've been using for Uranus and Gemini is lead with curiosity and not judgment. There's something about that that I think is super, super important with Uranus and Gemini because I've noticed, and you and I were starting to get into this just a little bit,
Mm.
about how I've noticed that there has been an increase in judgment and a decrease in curiosity. And what that does is it creates separation, which you were talking about. And
Mhm.
I love that you brought that up because I do think Uranus is so very much connected like Neptune.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly the purpose of Neptune is to crack us open so much so that we can actually do what Neptune wants us to do, which is go
Yeah.
home. And so there's something very beautiful about this. But if we can't be able to hold two paradoxical thoughts together, or beliefs, or people, whatever it may be, it's almost like this could be a very, very difficult chapter where we're going to separate ourselves even more.
Yeah.
Because keep in mind, there's something about Uranus that can be very alienating, that can be very isolating, that can really push itself like an outsider. And there's something about this that I wrote a note here where this is about breaking open the consensus thoughts. This is about getting rid of the societal normal conversations, breaking that open. And one of the difficulties that I've noticed is that because of the culture that we live in, if you believe something different than me, I can't be your friend. I can't even date you. Like I can't do that. Like that's not a thing. And I've had so many experiences with people who have these types of thoughts that what we're ultimately doing is we're actually judging, ostracizing, and what we're actually, we think we're pushing them away, but we're actually alienating ourselves.
Yep.
And there's something about this that I think is, this is a whole bigger conversation we'll get into, but there's something about this that I think Uranus and Gemini is going to bring to the surface for us. And the other mark I made here is where's the balance between the head and the heart? Because I think at the core of it all, not only is it curiosity, but it's compassion. It's being able to have compassion for other people. Or there's another word I want to use, objective.
Mm-hmm.
To be objective with people, to recognize that it is so I can hold space for you even though you don't agree with me. That's cool. Actually, I kind of think it's awesome. That
Agreed.
makes you you. Why would I not want to be friends with someone who that's who they are, that they know who they are, as long as we can treat each other that way,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that's what's so difficult about Aquarian and Uranian energy. It's difficult for people to navigate because I think we're conditioned to separate from each other.
Well, and I think that's because we're conditioned that sameness equals safety, right? So this is kind of what we're up against here, because I liked what you brought up around what I'm calling kind of, well, I guess the words that came to me is this like blowing up normalization. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
so this
Yes.
idea of like, because all of us have our own way of normalizing what has been normal in our life, which doesn't mean it was normal at all, if normal even is a thing, right? So
Right.
part of it is, but you get what I'm saying, that in that space of, well, that's not normal or that's not right, which is even a bigger one because Uranus is not, I mean, it is not binary.
Yeah.
It is fluid, it's shades, it's different, it's the diversity, the unity in diversity. So
Yeah.
anytime that we are sort of having this approach, you brought this up so beautifully, and I know I do this all the time. Again, we're conditioned. We didn't do something wrong. We've all been conditioned. So I just want to say this is the thing, like, and actually, that's normal. I mean, where we're at on all levels is normal based on where we come from.
Totally
It's
okay.
yeah, right. And I think it's so important to have that compassion and recognize, well, of course that makes sense. Of course here we are, but that also doesn't mean that there's not things that we can do to make it better now. And
Mhm.
so when I'm thinking about all these conversations that we may have with each other, whether it be on bigger government levels or individual ones, almost always we're in the back of our minds, is that right? Is that wrong? Do I go along with that? Do I not go along with that? Very rarely do we come from a place of just trying to understand where the person comes from.
100%.
So I loved
Yeah.
what you said because I feel like the Gemini at its best, I think it's Stephen Forrest that says it's like perfect open-mindedness, which is there is no need to convince or convert. We're simply, getting curious
Yeah.
about what's here.
And I think that is of paramount importance because that's where we're heading.
Yeah.
That's where the wave is going, this metaphorical wave, or a cloud. Let's use some air energy. The
Yeah.
cloud
Yeah.
is shifting in that direction. And I feel like one of the, and again, I think it's going to be like a bombarding of information. I love what you said earlier. Where am I getting my information from?
Yeah.
Because is the information that I'm getting also causing me to separate myself from other people
Or myself.
or myself? Yeah, yeah. And one of the things that I used this as an example to you earlier, I had gotten an advertisement for a podcast. Um, and I don't remember the person's last name. I just know that she's the actress from Full House.
Mm.
And she's also a singer. I think she was on the TV show Mask Singers or something like that,
Oh,
where you wear a mask and you sing on TV.
whoa.
And she was in the advertisement was marketing herself as being the person in which she wants to sit down and have a conversation with someone because they don't have the same belief systems.
Oh,
And while that is very, very positive, what happened at the end of the marketing was how she wanted to, and it was very subtle. I noticed it because I was listening from a Uranian perspective. Oh my God, is she doing this? Is she bringing us together?
yeah.
No, because then it brought in the religious component. And she was saying, because then from her belief system, from her religious conditioning, that is how I could connect, or that is then you can welcome more of this into your life, what I believe you can let into your life. And what happens is that the Uranus and Gemini, what this is about is not putting what you think is right
Oh,
on someone else. Because what you think is right, and I'm quoting you, if it's not true for everyone, then it's not true. It's just your opinion.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
And what's happening is, I don't want you to believe my opinion.
Yeah.
I want you to develop your own, and I want to respect you for your own and recognize that we could coexist peacefully, amicably, and unconditionally. It is possible. What happens is that Uranus and Gemini wants us to, Uranus will disrupt this way of being for us to find ways to connect in new and exciting ways where we can lean into our curiosities for each other rather than judge people because they voted differently than you or because they don't believe the same religion as you is because you're more spiritual than me or blah blah blah. I can relate to you. I can connect with you. I can talk with you. Because at the end of the day, the people that you're judging, the people that you are chastising, that you're alienating, that you're separating yourself from, you're just doing it to yourself. You are literally hurting yourself. And you are causing more pain and more hurt and more of what Uranus rules as the mental traumas. You are
Yeah.
creating and you are allowing this to unfold by continuing this pattern. And I feel like it's just so important for us to open up more and be like, hey, like, I want to understand this. Like, I don't want to convince you of my opinion. I just want to understand where you're coming from. And if I can understand that, I have so much respect for you. Like, we're good. Everything is good. As long as we can see that with each other, that's okay. It's possible. It
Mhm.
is possible for that paradox to exist peacefully. And that's such a Uranian thing.
It is. It really is. And I like the way you approach that because it was very honest and it wasn't making things pretty. I know I was sharing with you earlier before we started recording, but I was reading The Astrology of Fate by
Yeah.
Liz Green, and she, in the Pluto section, she was talking about how we in astrology tend to use euphemisms to make planets and things sound a little nicer and less intense, right? And I've realized how much I've done that over the years. For example, Uranus is, but it's a complete liberation, right? Things are going to feel so much better. You're going to feel more authentic. Yes, yes, and there will probably be some level of what you might perceive as trauma, right? Again, trauma is not the thing that happens, it's how we respond to it, right? There may be some level of major disruption. You may have some abrupt endings. Something
Oh,
may
yeah.
leave. You may leave something. I think it's so important. The older I get and the more I get into this work, I'm all about the wholeness,
100%.
right? And
Yeah.
so I like that we're able to lean into that to say, yes, you can make your life and this life worse by continuing to perpetuate your mental patterns, your need to
Yeah.
be right, your need to do whatever it is that you do. The other thing that I was thinking about is that, of course, when Uranus is in Gemini, the ruler is Mercury. Right? And
Yes.
Mercury, of course, also goes by Hermes. And hermeneutics is something that's linked with Hermes and Mercury, right? And hermeneutics is just about ways to move between things. So in psychology, we talk about, like, for example, internal family systems therapy, which works with, for example, like, you know, the self having a conversation with the part. That's a hermeneutic that allows us to have a relationship between the unconscious and the conscious. So
Yeah,
Hermes and Mercury and hermeneutics in general allow us to move between things. So
totally.
I'm saying we can apply that in many different ways. I just tend to be a psychological bent person, so that's kind of
Yeah.
where I go. But in all ways, think about even in mythology, right? Mercury is the messenger of the gods, and Mercury goes between the upper and the lower world. And one of the things I think, I'm sure it was Jason Hawley recently, I think at Norwalk was talking about how Mercury, that going between, Mercury knows when to lighten up, when to go up a little bit. Oh, we can go a little deeper. Oh, let's get a breath and come up here. So there's something also with this transit, I feel like, that really pulls that ability. So if you're wanting to get into therapy for yourself, this could be an amazing time to pull it up. If you want to get into any kind of creative project, because art for me is active imagination. Art is a way to bring again unconscious into the conscious. So I see this as a innovative, creative way of leaning into the energy. And to your point about that, letting people have their own opinions and seeking to understand them instead of trying to somehow judge or decide, what's good or what's not good, that the most creative outcomes come from those differences. It
Mm,
doesn't come from us getting together and saying, "Oh, I always agree with you, Ricky." And yes, I always had the same perspective, right? You and I share a lot of things in common, so that there
yeah.
was some of that too, but that's not where the things get juicy and exciting.
Mm,
And Uranus is about innovation. It's about brilliance. It's about breakthroughs. I mean, think about all the different things in intelligence, and technology and medicine. I mean, I was looking back in the 1940s, right? The last time that Uranus was in Gemini. And I know you and I are going to touch on the wars, which is not
yeah.
such a happy subject, but during the period of time when Uranus was in Gemini, 1941 to 1949, we invented Velcro, Tupperware, the Frisbee, the Slinky, the microwave oven. Like, I mean, so we can also realize that if we are able to open our minds, that those things are really possible.
1,000,000%, 1,000%. And I wanted to say one thing on Mercury really quick. 'Cause I made a note. I think Mercury
Hmm.
is going to be so important
Yeah.
because right now Mercury rules the South Node.
Hmm.
Mercury will be ruling this Uranus.
Hmm.
And I just think you're getting a double dosage of the opportunity for us. Like you said, the concept of doing therapy and the concept of doing something like the opportunity for such healing is immense. And
Yeah.
then the other thing I wanted to add was that Uranus in modern astrology is ruling Pluto and Aquarius.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
what a better conversation to have than Mercury ruling Uranus and Uranus ruling Pluto? And it's almost like there's a little triad happening here.
Sky god to the underworld god.
Bingo,
Yeah.
exactly. And what's happening is it's almost like what is unconscious beneath the surface is it's almost like Mercury wants to go down there and be like, what is Ricky ready for today? Let's go down there and bring it up to the surface. And then
Yeah.
we're gonna deal with this today. And we're gonna stay up here. Okay, now we're good. Let's go back down. I love
Yep.
that you said because that's such the vibration of what we can see.
Yeah.
And this is all about the deconstruction and the deconditioning process. Pluto wants to expose all of that.
Yeah.
Uranus wants to liberate that from us. And what I love that you said is we need to be honest. This doesn't mean we are projecting fear, but it's about maintaining a level of unbiased. I'm just showing you what I see. This
Yes.
is the energy. I would rather not sugarcoat that. I would rather say, hey, I wish 7 years ago, someone looked at 8 years ago and said, hey, just letting you know, you're going to go through this major Uranus and it's going to be shitty. You're going to have a
Yeah.
lot of stuff going on right now. And it may feel like your whole world's falling apart, but don't worry, it's going to come back together. I didn't have that. I had to figure it out on my own.
Yeah.
Now I look at it and I'm like, now I know that so that when someone's going through it, I don't want to sugarcoat a Uranian transit. What justice am I doing? Or Pluto?
Yep.
part of their Pluto transit might be me being like, hey, giving you a big heads up, like, look at this area of your life because it ain't going to be the same.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, we have to do that planetary body justice
Yeah.
for what it is going to bring to the table.
Hmm.
And as a client, like, you deserve to know that. You know, I know unfortunately we have so much of this like toxic positivity movement going on
So
where like
true.
we just want to, you know, love, peace, light, joy, whatever. I forget what people say,
Yeah.
but like it's not always going to be that way. I'm so sorry.
It's
And
not
that's
whole. Again, it's not whole. And anytime we are not whole, anytime we push things away, the
yeah,
unconscious has to compensate. And that truly brings the crazy.
100%,
Mhm.
100%. And I think that is just something to keep in mind as we navigate this journey. I love what you said. The thing about the wars, which I love
Yeah.
as well.
We don't
So
love the wars, but we love
I know,
the
right?
patterns.
I know. What's unique is that, you know, we're not getting into a predictive state here. I don't want to say like I'm
No.
predicting something or anything like that, but I'm just looking at the themes that have been unfolding in history. And for preface, this really is tied to the US and to aspects of the world. That the last time that Uranus, I'm just looking at the charts, the last time
Yeah.
Uranus was in Taurus would bring us back to about
Oh, and Gemini.
1941, 1940. I said
And
Taurus, sorry,
yeah, Gemini.
Gemini,
Mhm.
1941, 1942, which would have been around World War II.
Yep.
Um, and like you were saying, there actually were amazing innovations that were happening at
Mhm.
the time. How we were able to communicate the information that was happening during that time was purely the Uranian energy that was coming through.
Mm.
How the newspapers were transmitting information, the developments that were happening with the technology of the television were like all of
Right.
these different things were unfolding. The books that were being published during this time,
Yeah.
um, all of this was happening while Uranus was in Gemini, while there was a massive war happening on the planet.
Yeah.
Then we had the Cold War coming at the end of the 40s. And one of the other things is that there things were happening in Vietnam at the same time. That was
Mm.
starting to boil. When we go 84 years prior, this brings us into the 1860s, which would be around the Civil War.
Yeah.
And then again, we could see from our own history knowledge what was happening. How were we relating to each other? How were we communicating with each other? How were we separating each other? How were we alienating each other? All of these different things that could come up.
It made me think of things like Underground Railroad. Made me think of what connections and things that had to be done different
Yeah,
ways too. Like, I don't know, I haven't thought about that before, but I feel like that's another
that's a good
Gemini.
example. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Doing something like that, I think, is huge.
It's radical
Um,
too. Like to this day, we still feel like, wow, those people were like, I mean, huge risks, radical ways to actually to connect things and move things forward, including human
100%.
beings, which is terrifying. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the poetry that came out of that time period, the
Oh,
songs that came out of that time period, the books that came out of that time period that have become icons for learning the English language in the US.
yeah.
Then we go 84 years prior again, and this brings us into the 17. Wait, sorry. Did I do my math right? Yeah, the 1780s, which is getting into the energy of the Revolutionary War, the French War, the Haitian War, all of those
Oh,
different civil wars were unfolding all at the same time. There's no coincidence that when Uranus is in Gemini, Uranus does represent some essence of revolution,
yeah.
that there is something that is trying to change. There's a message or something that is shifting. And so, again, that's not to say that what we're heading into is that. But the question is, does history repeat itself? You know, we just had in the month of June some very real, you know, threats of the potentiality of scaling up for something like that. And as of now, I mean, I'm not up to date with the news as of today, but I don't know if it's still a ceasefire. I don't know what's happening. But I mean, I feel like we can all hold on to our chairs. Like, I don't know. Like, you're on it. You can't plan for this.
Other
Uh,
countries are still at war right now. I mean, that
oh, that's
hasn't
true. I'm only
changed.
looking at it from the US
Yeah.
perspective. You're totally
Yeah.
right.
So all of a sudden, like, yeah.
And I think there's something to this that when also there is a war or when there's a massive conflict like this, it does cause a massive wave of innovation, like massive technology innovation 101. So again, we could see, I would venture, based upon what we could see just in the past, what is that, 200, 300 years,
Yeah.
that there has been these types of themes that have been showing up for us while Uranus is in Gemini. And then the other thing I just want to bring up is you brought up a good point that it's been quite a bit of time since Uranus was in Gemini and Pluto was in an air sign
And they'll be trying.
because
Yeah.
they'll have this trine
Hmm.
um, coming up in 2027. I think we
Yeah.
said.
Yep.
So I just feel like it's important worth noting that we are experiencing these energies, um, and we're in a space where, like I said earlier, the paradigm is shifting. There is a change that's happening, and we don't have to look far to see it.
Yeah. I'm wondering what you think about this. That I've been sort of thinking about how, okay, so when Uranus is in Gemini, there's war. So I don't normally think about Gemini as war, right? So I'm just so I was thinking though that Gemini is the final sign of the first quadrant in the wheel,
Mhm.
which means it is about getting relative perspective and learning and transitioning, or almost like tilling the ground for the beginning of the second quadrant, which begins
Mhm.
with Cancer.
Yeah,
And Cancer would have a lot to do with sort of putting my stake in my homeland, or this is kind of my roots, or this is how I'm going to live, or this is, and I'm wondering if one of the reasons why we see this reflection with the warlike energy is that there's something about settling back into that sort of root of sense of identity or sense of self or sense of home that comes with the beginning of the second quadrant, Cancer, right after that Gemini energy. I'm wondering if you have any feelings or thoughts about that.
it's totally an interest. It is interesting. I guess one of the things that I lean into is that Uranus, being a rebel, is willing to fight for what it believes in. There is something about it being the rebel that it can have that nature.
Yeah.
And if you study the mythology of Uranus, which you and I were talking about a little bit earlier, and I am not an expert in this,
Me neither.
there can be some from the stories. There can be some anger. There can be some aggression in the mythology that we're. I could sense that there's a metaphor tied to the anger and the aggressions, and there's something about or jealousy or something like that within Uranus or the mythology of Uranus. But it reflects to Sagittarius. And so there's something to this that I feel like with having Uranus and Gemini, you can't exclude Sag.
Yes.
And when Uranus ingressed into Gemini, it was conjunct Venus, and I believe it was opposing the moon in Sagittarius. And so, and for those of us that might be new, the ingress chart is a great tool for us to kind of have some insight into what we could potentially expect or anticipate for the journey of this transit that we're looking at. It's a great tool for us to see. That totally feels like a conflict of beliefs.
Mhm.
And it's almost like my beliefs are right and your beliefs are wrong. And I feel like, you know, there is a little bit of a shadowy side to Gemini or deceptive side to Gemini that
Yep,
I could
lies.
see
Hmm.
that coming out. Um, you know, so I do kind of feel like there is a little bit of a signature, but you wouldn't necessarily initially associate
No.
a war within Gemini. But the more that I see certain things that show up with just this specific transit, we also have Saturn in Aries and Neptune in Aries. And I
Yeah.
feel like that adds fuel to this. It's almost like there's a fire and the air is adding like the gasoline or something. I
Yeah.
don't know if it's like it's adding to it
Yeah.
to create that. Or it would be CO2. Is it CO2 and fire creates the explosion? Is that what it is? Whatever that chemical reaction is.
Yeah.
Like
I
when
don't know
there's,
exactly, but
do you know what I'm talking about?
yeah. Yeah. So
Or
there's the,
gas. Um, so I rambled on that, but it was just it's definitely an interesting thought to think. And I do think the Gemini Sag axis has something to do with fighting for what we believe in.
hmm
Um, even if that belief is alienating and isolating everyone else around you. You
Yeah.
know, um, it's interesting. It's an interesting thought. The other thing I just want to say, I'm just looking at time too. The other thing I just want to say that I realized I forgot to bring up earlier, um, was the idea of the education system.
Yes.
I wanted to make a note on this because if you look at Uranus and Gemini in its transits in the past, there were chapters of development of the education system and how we teach children. And I wouldn't be surprised if the way in which we are educating children or the approach of educating children or that whole at that mundane level, like that level, I wouldn't be surprised if there are new ways. Like right now, I think STEM is science, technology. I don't know, science, technology, something in mathematics. I don't remember what the E is.
Mm, mm,
That's something like that's an approach of how children are taught.
mm.
I wouldn't be surprised if that there are alterations to how children are being taught or how parents want to teach their children.
Yeah.
Like that could totally be something that is shifting here. Um, Maybe we want to teach our children more open-mindedness and more curiosity. Um, not having such judgmental beliefs on certain things. I wouldn't be surprised. I just think then watching the overall education system, I think would be unique. Um, you know, what is our relationships with the text that we're using, the textbooks that we're
Mm.
using? Are books going to get banned or new? But I don't know. I don't. It'll be interesting to see. I wouldn't think Uranus would be banning books, but I always say we have to appreciate the shadow side of things.
Well, that's funny that you say that because one of the things on my list to bring up is that during the last time in the 40s when Uranus was in Gemini, that's when George Orwell's books 1984 and Animal Farm were published. And by the way, if it gets loud, of course the yard people are coming through, so it's probably going to sound like a like the
Oh,
house is being
good.
taken over. But what's interesting about those books, of course, we know the 1984 was about Big Brother and the war against totalitarianism, right? So, and many people, at least when I was Googling, they talk about how what was fiction, what was not true is now true in those books.
Yeah,
But in many schools and libraries, 1984 is banned. It's not a national ban, but it is banned many places. So I
it's
actually
interesting.
I just reordered those books. I don't know, I have them somewhere in my library, but I just reordered them because I was like I wanted to read them. Like they were
Yeah,
written during this time last time. I feel like they're very on point for now.
such an homage to it. I totally agree.
Yeah.
It's like I think
Yeah.
it's a great way to honor the energy, like a ritual.
Yes.
I think that's a great idea. So
And then,
it'll be interesting. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
well, you brought up the a little bit of the mythology, which I know neither you or I are mythology experts, but here goes the yard. But but yeah, we should have expected it with how things went before we got on here to record. Like things were already on the fritz, so
Expect
it's
the
like
unexpected. You can't plan the unexpected.
Uranus is in the yard, so welcome. But yeah, so in mythology, right, Uranus has, I think 12 different children. I think that's about what he had. And he was really excited about the idea of them. Once they were born, he wanted nothing to do with them. In fact, he like shoved them back down into the earth, which was, into their mother's womb, Gaia. So there's this idea behind things that what sometimes we think we're going to want, even our own creations, that once they materialize or manifest, that then oftentimes that it's like absolutely not what we wanted. But what's interesting in this story, because you mentioned that there being like kind of the warlike, rebellious nature in this, that one of Uranus's children was Saturn,
Yeah.
right? And Saturn, as many of you probably know, was able to he got out and he was able to castrate his father Uranus. And so the blood spilling created birth of different things, but there was this literally taking over. And then Saturn, when he had his children, he was afraid that they would take him over because his parents had told him that that would happen. Of course, we know why, because literally that's the family story here. And then Jupiter, or known as Zeus, on the Greek side, then eventually chops up his father Saturn. So this whole idea of children, and I would encourage us to extrapolate that bigger to anything we create, sort of any of these
Yeah,
sort of things, that those things being stuffed back down inside creates rebellion. So
totally.
even that very story down that whole lineage, and isn't it interesting that we're kind of back to when you were talking about Saturn in the order of then Uranus? Even in the mythology, they're very intertwined, right? That's a father and son relationship that continues this interesting pattern of needing
Totally.
to break free from the suppression or containment that came before. So
Yeah,
I wonder if when we put that planet in the sign Gemini, if in some ways it just sort of means that the signal is sent. It made me think of like in a war, right? Somebody either blows something up or we send, like, there's something about, something exchanging between that starts the thing off. And that to me is very Gemini.
totally. Yeah. It's interesting because the mythology of Uranus, I think, and I was saying this to you before, is so Saturnian in its own way
Yeah.
for a Uranian story. And so it's a unique way for us to lean into this Uranian to the Uranus transit. And out of all of this, I don't remember the technicalities of this, but Venus or Aphrodite is born out of the ocean from all of this, which I think is just such a
Yeah,
unique
from the
energy.
castrated parts going into the, so yeah, so there's life that comes up from all of this. The giants are born from the blood too.
And so it's there's something about this of uh I don't and I also get Pluto vibes in this all of this too because it
Oh,
feels
totally.
because there's something about this of having to go through having, I guess, the courage
Yeah.
to be able to sit with those parts that we want to shove back down, but you can't,
Or
and
you
are going to
can,
serve.
but there's serious consequences for it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like to have the courage to be able to allow those to come up, and then I would encourage you to ask yourself, how free would you feel if you knew that those parts of yourself that you're trying to suppress could be released?
Yeah.
What would life be like if I could finally let this be released and let it go? Whatever that may be,
Yeah.
would be freedom, would be liberation. And that's exactly what Uranus is about. So it's
Yeah.
not so scary.
I think that oftentimes we make those things monsters. And I will say from a psychological standpoint, when you open those things up, sometimes there is a big force to be,
Yeah.
reckoned with, which is why, therapy can be so helpful. So we have help in that process. But just like any animal that we might squash in a cage, its nature we don't know until we actually open the cage and let it actually breathe and be itself. So those things that we, stuff or shove or whatever words we want to use, or even dissociate, which is another word we didn't talk about, but that can be a very Uranian thing as
Oh, yeah,
well,
totally. Oh, yeah.
right? But there's something about the bringing, rememberment, right?
Yeah.
Dismemberment is the parts of us, parts, and then rememberment, literally, right? We're bringing those things back together. And you're right, it takes a lot of courage to do that.
100%. I have one last thought that I
Yeah.
just came to me that we always sometimes consider. What's really cool is that in the tarot, Gemini rules the lovers.
Yeah.
And in the tarot, the tower has this Uranian energy to it. It also has
Mars. Some Mars in there. Yeah.
the fool. Um,
Yes. The 0 point.
so I like this energy because what I reason why I brought the lovers into the equation because the tower has the lovers collapsing, coming down with the tower. And it has so much, yes, the lovers can talk about relationships, but at this level, I think we're talking about choices. I think we're talking about what choices we've made in the past, what we've done, having to look at those things and being able to be brave enough, to be courageous enough, the fool, to take that risk, to take that leap of faith, perhaps to either watch that tower come down, to initiate the tower coming down, whatever, to make that choice to be like, okay, we're going to do it. We're going to look at these things.
Yeah.
Or if that has already happened, it's time for you to be brave, to be bold, to take that leap of faith, to initiate that new chapter, those new experiences for
Yeah.
yourself. Um, I just thought it was unique. I was thinking about the parallel of those cards and how they show up. Anyone that
Yeah.
likes the tarot, I would put the Fool, I would put the Lovers, and I would put the Tower right next to each
Yep.
other and just look at the sequence of how those show up for you.
Yeah.
Um, I had wrote two questions to
Yeah.
ask that I was brainstorming as contemplations. One of them I kind of think I've already gotten into. Um, and one of the questions I wrote was, how do I respond when I encounter information from a family member or a friend or a stranger that
Mm.
contradicts what I currently believe?
Mm. Yeah. Good.
So I kind of got into that a little bit earlier, but I think that's going to be a very like a strong theme that we're going to get.
Yeah.
That I think if we can ask ourselves this question now and start leaning into that when an event happens again in the future, which it will, we can handle it differently than how you've handled it in the past.
Yeah.
Um, and then my second question, which we kind of get into with something that you were saying, was, is my communication, the way that I'm sharing information or listening, because communication isn't always talking, it's listening,
Yeah.
is it aligned with a higher intention?
Mm.
And is it only for yourself or is it for everyone?
Mhm.
Because there's something about this that Uranus is trying at its core level is gonna find, you said it earlier, which I loved, which is unity in union in, I forgot how you said it.
Oh,
Union and togetherness
it's
or union,
diversity. It's union. Yeah, union and diversity, or diversity and unity. Yep.
that concept.
Hmm.
And being able to still have you in the diversity of it all is
Yeah.
would very much satiate Uranus. But when you consider that, the way that you're communicating with others and the way that you are listening to others, which I think is super important because Gemini is so good at talking that it can struggle to listen.
Yep.
And it could be the teller, oh, you should go do this. Oh, go do this. Go do that. It could tell things. I think it was Stephen Forrest that said Gemini would learn so much more in this lifetime if it would shut its mouth and listen. If
It
it would
talks. Yeah.
listen.
It talks at you. And honestly, well, I just talked over you, so here's me, Gemini.
Oh,
Yes,
you're
yes.
good. But no, but it's a good point.
Yeah. It talks at you, and then also sometimes, and I have South Node in Gemini, so I'm very much just disclaiming myself here, right? So it talks it,
Venus and Gemini, we're in the same boat.
yeah. So, and also sometimes what we're doing is we're using the other person or other people to facilitate our own inner conversation. It really isn't about the other person at all, which is cool if I can say, "Hey, Ricky, I need to process out loud. Can you be there for me?" But bringing consciousness to it instead of simply using someone, kind of back to that podcast example you used, to just somehow, run my agenda or run my own story. So,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
I love what you just said. That is actually an exercise I do with my best friend, is what you just said.
uh,
So I will purposely, or he'll look at me and be like, hey, I just want to share something with you. And so we'll go for like a 2 hour walk and I won't say a word. I
mm,
just listen. And I'm just like, okay, cool, cool, okay, cool. I have a cup of tea. And it's listening to what they're saying consciously.
yeah.
And I think that is something that is so, so important. And in The Power of Now, he talks about, which Eckhart Tolle's book, he
Hmm.
talks about the difference between deep listening and unconscious listening. And what happens is I think if we could slow down our brain enough, the Gemini in us can hear what someone has to say and ask really good questions,
Yeah.
really good, juicy questions. Instead of saying something like that, like, oh, telling things, why not ask a question?
Yeah.
I think questions are much sexier. And I think Gemini, and it actually will like create a sexier environment. It creates more fun. Rather than saying things or telling people things, ask questions, get to know somebody and see what happens. And I feel like Uranus is like the electricity. It could be like the electricity in the air could be sparked. So
Synchronicity, like it will,
yeah,
if you're available. I have a friend who's not an astrologer, and he used to always say, answers are a prison, questions set you free.
love it.
Yeah.
Cut the scene.
Yeah. Cut the scene. Yes.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's exactly that's how I feel. I feel that deeply. And I think it's important for us to reflect upon that now more than ever. It'll bring us more together.
Mhm.
So those were my two. I have a few more, but those I think are two good questions to at least get us anchored into this energy
Yeah.
for the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think that covers most of mine too. I mean, of course, we always have more, but I feel like we touched on the important things. I
Yeah.
had some of you know my addiction to RuPaul's Drag Race. So I said that my
You should,
my
yeah, say that.
so yeah, I wanted to share it because it was interesting that and it just came up happenstance. Like I was working on class material using RuPaul's chart for something, but then I was also kind of sitting in the space to be talking, Ricky, with you and everyone who's tuning in, whenever space and time here, that I was thinking about how that Uranus has so much to do with what we consider crazy, right? Crazy things happen, crazy people show up, crazy
Yeah.
experiences. I'm putting quotes around that, but Gemini also has a tendency to be a little out there. So you put those two together, and there can be kind of a lot of sort of woo, if it's a fun
Yeah.
house, good time, or fun house, scary, time.
Both.
But there's this,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly, both. That's so good, right? We doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both. But there's a RuPaul quote that says, "All things to do with drag are inherently therapeutic because the realization of your own insanity is the beginning of sanity."
Hmm.
And I love that for me as a lean in with this transit.
Yeah. I love it.
So, and again,
I
this,
think that's a great reflection to think about in your own life. Um, yeah, I love that. I don't even want to that's perfect.
yeah, but we could muse on about it, meaning that really the belief that we are like that everything is, and this is a Gemini, very linear, organized, we have it all put together, like that's a load of shit. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It is. Oh,
Yeah,
100%. It's a facade.
yeah.
Um, I love it. I think that's a beautiful quote. I think that's a beautiful quote for us to lean into.
Hmm.
I don't know. It's in a way too, very Uranian is discovering our individuality,
Yeah, which makes it very,
and expressing it.
which means it fits with something like drag, which is extreme, which is like it is, but at the same time, it's there's a way to like do it in a more lighthearted way. And
Yeah.
and that's a very Gemini thing, right? To like, I have a friend who's Gemini, and she will always say my Gemini is unbothered. She'll use that language,
Yeah.
right? Because there's something about that ability to laugh. Like you were talking about, like, here's something different, you don't agree with it, but there's like an ability to not be so bothered. And this leads me back to the word you use, objectivity with Uranus, which is so important. And with
Yeah.
air energy to the objectivity, the
Totally.
ability to step up and out, give things some light and some air, right? Some breathing room to them, I think is
100%.
super, super important. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
My only last, I just realized something that I was going to say,
yeah,
just for the record, was
yeah.
I'm very interested in the developments over the next couple of years when it comes to um, I don't like the word aliens, so I call them higher frequency beings.
Nice.
Um, or extraterrestrial. And I'd be very interested to see if there's any developments when it comes to that type of information,
Mm.
if there's any sort of activations or any wisdoms or any conversations around that type of stuff that could be unfolding
I bet
with
there will
Uranus and
be. I
Gemini.
bet there will be.
It'll be interesting. So I just made a note of that and I put,
Mm.
is there going to be anything around this? Are we going to notice any more conversations about this? So yeah,
And I love that I don't like the word alien either, because alien to what? You know what I
exactly.
mean? Like, come on.
I never liked that word, and I don't even like the word extraterrestrial. It's just it never fit with me. So I call it higher frequency beings.
I think that, and correct me if I'm not accurate here, I think that's because both of those ways of looking at it put us in a very ego position. And I think that
100%.
that is one of the things that Uranus, especially Uranus and Gemini, is to open our mind to all the different dimensions and frequencies and intelligences. And so if we say extraterrestrial, that sounds like that terrestrial is like the central of
Yeah,
the multiverse or something. So
100%. It doesn't.
no.
I don't know. It didn't connect with me.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that it'll be interesting. So I'm excited. Those are all. I think it's all good
Yeah.
stuff. In the long run. Um, I'm excited. Like I said, I'm excited. I'm excited for the shakeups. I'm excited for the wake ups. I'm
Yeah.
excited for the breakthroughs. All of it. There's a lot of opportunity. I think in the coming years.
Agreed.
So thank
Thank
you.
you, Ricky. It's always so good spending time together. Thank you, everybody, for being here whenever you
Thank you.
are.
Yes, wherever you guys are. Thank you. And if you have any questions, let us know in the comments.
Yep. Yep. We'll be checking them.
Yeah, and we'll
All
see you
right.
guys next time.
Yep. Bye.
Bye, guys.